You don't give up in one dramatic moment. You give up in a quiet shift that even you don't notice at first. It starts with one morning where you wake up and the first thing you feel isn't panic. You still think of them, of course you do, but the thought doesn't grab you by the throat like it used to. Your hand doesn't reach for your phone like it's oxygen. You don't check if they viewed your story. You don't replay the last conversation searching for the hidden meaning. You just sit there with the ache, and for the first time, you don't feed it. And that is what they feel. Because an avoidant can handle your chasing. They can handle your emotions, your paragraphs, your please just talk to me, your late night spirals, your desperate need to fix what feels broken. Not because they don't care, but because your chasing keeps the dynamic familiar. It keeps them in a position where they can retreat and still be wanted. It keeps them in a position where your love does the heavy lifting. It keeps them in a position where they don't have to risk much because you're already proving again and again that you'll stay close even when they go cold. When you chase, you make their distance feel safe. And I know that sounds painful because you weren't chasing to give them power. You were chasing because you loved. You were chasing because you believed connection could be repaired if you tried hard enough. You were chasing because you thought if you were patient, understanding, gentle, if you didn't pressure them, they'd finally come toward you and stay. You were chasing because you saw their softness underneath the armor, and you thought, if I just love them properly, they'll stop running. But what happens over time is that your nervous system gets tired of begging for basic presence. Your heart gets tired of living on the edge of someone's moods. Your spirit gets tired of interpreting silence like it's a language you have to become fluent in. And one day, without revenge, without drama, without needing them to understand, something in you releases the rope, not loudly, peacefully. That's the moment the avoidant begins to collapse inside, because calm acceptance is the one thing they can't control. Anger still ties you to them. Tears still tie you to them. Questions still tie you to them. Even your heartbreak can keep you connected because it still revolves around them. But calm acceptance, the kind where you stop trying to change the outcome, that feels like disappearance. That feels like loss. That feels like the door closing without a fight. And it shakes them in a way your begging never could. They notice it in tiny signals. You don't respond instantly. You don't respond emotionally. You don't respond with the old warmth that used to rush in the second they gave you a crumb. Your tone becomes steady. Your words become simple. You stop asking for reassurance in disguise forms. You stop checking in to keep the thread alive. You stop offering comfort for behavior that keeps hurting you. And when you do this, it's not just the silence that changes. It's the energy behind it. Your silence is no longer waiting. It's moving. An avoidant is often calm when you're still emotionally available because your availability becomes their safety net. It tells them they can step back without consequence. It tells them they can return whenever they want and find you in the same place, still soft, still open, still willing to restart the story like the pain never happened. But when you reach calm acceptance, you become unpredictable in the most terrifying way, not chaotic, not manipulative, just unreachable in the old sense. They can't pull you back with the same buttons. And that's when their mind begins to spiral in a way yours used to. They start checking, not always through action, sometimes just internally. They start wondering why you're quiet. They start telling themselves you're just busy, because denial is soothing. They start assuming you'll come back, because that assumption protected them before. They start waiting for the familiar cycle, your message, your softness, your return. And when it doesn't come, confusion creeps in. Confusion is the first crack in the collapse, because confusion forces them to face a reality they've been avoiding, that your love was not endless, that your patience had a limit, that your devotion was not a permanent guarantee. And this is where the avoidance nervous system does something very human. It tries to regain control. Control can look like a casual message. Control can look like a random meme. Control can look like a, "Hey, how are you?" thrown out like a fishing line. Not always because they're ready for a relationship, but because they need to know if you're still there. If you respond the old way, quickly, emotionally, generously, the crack seals. The collapse pauses. They feel safe again. The pattern survives. But if you don't, if you stay calm, if you stay kind but unmoved, if you keep your dignity in your hands, and refuse to drop it for temporary warmth, something deeper happens inside them. They feel the consequence. They feel the absence of your emotional labor. They feel what it's like when the person who used to hold the connection together stops holding it. And this is the part that feels cruel to them. But it isn't cruelty, it's reality. Calm acceptance is not you punishing them. It's you stepping out of the role you were never meant to play, the role of caretaker for someone else's avoidance. It's you refusing to keep paying the emotional cost of their comfort. It's you choosing to stop bleeding quietly just to keep love alive. And that's what shocks them, not because you became cold, but because you became clear. They realize you're not arguing anymore. You're not trying to convince them. You're not pleading for communication. You're not chasing closure. You've accepted that the pattern is the message. And when you accept the pattern, you stop negotiating with it. You stop calling inconsistency busy. You stop calling silence space. You stop calling crumbs progress. You call it what it is, unstable love, and you step away. That step away creates a vacuum where their mind begins replaying moments they dismissed. The times you were patient, the times you asked gently, the times you offered understanding, the times you stayed when leaving would have protected you. They begin to realize your love wasn't just affection, it was effort, it was loyalty, it was forgiveness, and now that effort is gone, not as a threat, as a fact. And if there is anything in them that genuinely loved you, not just enjoyed you, not just used your warmth, but loved you, that part begins to ache. Not in a dramatic way at first, in a slow, heavy way. Because they're finally facing what you faced for so long, the feeling of reaching and not being met. Your calm acceptance becomes a mirror. It shows them the gap between what they claimed and what they practiced. It shows them the cost of their pattern. It shows them that you were not just someone who cared, you were someone who carried. And now that you're no longer carrying, they can either grow into responsibility or they can scramble for access. They can either return with repair or they can test you with crumbs. They can either rise or they can resent you for not staying available. But no matter what they do, your peace remains the turning point. Because the real collapse, the real shift, isn't only inside them, it's inside you. It's the moment you realize your love doesn't need to be proven through endurance. It's the moment you understand that calm acceptance is not giving up on love. It's giving up on what keeps breaking you. It's the moment you stop chasing the person who runs and you start walking back to yourself steadily, quietly, with a heart that is still tender but no longer negotiable. It doesn't look like a breakdown from the outside. That's what people don't understand. An avoidance collapse is often silent, internal, hidden behind a normal face and a casual tone. They can still go to work, still laugh at a joke, still look fine on social media, and yet inside, something is unraveling. Because what collapses first isn't their life, it's the illusion they've been living in, the illusion that they can keep you in orbit forever without fully choosing you. And the reason the collapse begins when you stop chasing is because chasing was never just attention, it was structure. It was the structure that allowed them to avoid responsibility while still receiving love. When you chased, you unknowingly became the engine of the relationship. You were the one who kept contact alive. You were the one who asked the questions. You were the one who repaired the ruptures. You were the one who carried the uncertainty. And as long as you were doing that, they could keep floating between closeness and distance without feeling the weight of consequence. That's what stage 2 is about. The nervous system processing the loss of the old dynamic, the loss of access, and the loss of control. Because when you finally give up, truly give up, the avoidant doesn't just lose you, they lose the predictable version of you. The version who would respond quickly, the version who would forgive easily, the version who would explain your pain softly so they wouldn't feel pressured, the version who would accept vagueness because clarity felt like it might push them away. They lose the person who made the relationship easy for them, not easy for you, easy for them. And here is where the internal collapse starts to move through its phases in a way that is almost like grief, but with something extra, the shock of not being in control anymore. At first, they tell themselves nothing changed. They tell themselves, you're just upset. They tell themselves, you'll cool down. They tell themselves, you always come back. They scroll your profile or check your last scene without reaching out, because reaching out would mean admitting there's a problem, and admitting there's a problem would mean responsibility. So they wait. They hold their distance like they always do because distance is their comfort zone. But then time passes, and your silence doesn't sound like anger. It sounds like closure. And that confuses them in a way that stings, because anger was something they could manage. Tears were something they could dismiss. Questions were something they could avoid. But closure doesn't ask. Closure doesn't chase. Closure doesn't negotiate. Closure simply moves forward. And when you move forward, you stop feeding the dynamic that kept them comfortable. That is when the mind begins to spiral. They start asking questions they never asked before, not out loud, but internally. Why isn't she texting? Why isn't he calling? Why isn't there a reaction? Why isn't there a paragraph? Why isn't there even anger? And the truth underneath those questions is simple: because you're not available the way you used to be. And for an avoidant, that availability was proof they were safe, proof they could take distance without losing you, proof they could delay commitment without consequence. Now that proof is gone. And when the proof is gone, the nervous system starts trying to restore it. This is where stage 2 becomes visible, because it's not only sadness, it's a scramble. It's the internal urgency that says, regain access, restore the old pattern, reopen the door before it closes completely. That's why their first move is often small: a casual message, a harmless joke, a memory, a "how have you been?" Something light enough to protect their ego from rejection, but strong enough to test whether you're still there. It's a feeler, a pulse check, a quiet attempt to see if your heart still responds the way it used to. And this is where your heart gets tested too, because the message feels like relief. You've been carrying an ache, and suddenly the ache gets a little quieter. You feel seen, even briefly. You feel remembered, and the old part of you wants to reward that with warmth, because warmth is your instinct. You want to believe that any reach is a sign of love. You want to believe that this is their awakening. But stage 2 teaches you something important. Reaching is not the same as returning. A reach is about access. A return is about repair. A reach tries to reopen connection without addressing why it broke. A return faces the truth. A reach wants comfort. A return offers safety. A reach is temporary. A return is a pattern. So when an avoidant is in stage 2 of their internal collapse, they often do what they've always done. They try to control the outcome without tolerating the discomfort of accountability. They want to soothe their fear without admitting the cost of their behavior. They want to know they still matter without risking real vulnerability. And if you respond the old way, if you respond quickly, emotionally, generously, the collapse pauses. They feel secure again. Their nervous system settles. The urgency disappears. And then the old pattern returns. The distance comes back. The vagueness comes back. The inconsistency comes back. Because the threat is gone, and without the threat, they don't feel forced to change. That's why stage 2 is so heartbreaking. It's the stage where you can mistake panic for love. Panic can look like late-night vulnerability. Panic can look like sudden sweetness. Panic can look like, "I miss you," after weeks of silence. Panic can look like promises. Panic can look like intensity that makes you feel chosen. But if it's panic, it won't last. It will fade the moment they regain access, because panic is a response to loss, not a commitment to growth. Real love, the kind that builds forever, doesn't only show up when you're leaving. Real love shows up when you're staying too. Real love is consistent when things are calm. Real love comes with accountability. Real love doesn't ask you to ignore your pain just to keep connection alive. So here is the narrative truth of stage 2. It's the point where their inner world starts realizing something you already knew: that the old dynamic is ending, that you are no longer the person who will keep chasing, that you are no longer the person who will accept half love, that you are no longer the person who will do the emotional labor alone. And the internal collapse becomes a choice, not for you, for them. They can either grow into emotional responsibility, or they can double down on avoidance. They can either return with repair, or they can keep reaching with crumbs. They can either face the mirror, or they can blame you for having a limit. But the most powerful part of this stage is what happens inside you. Because while they're scrambling to restore access, you're learning to protect your peace. You're learning that calm acceptance is not coldness, it's self-respect. You're learning that boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. You're learning that love that requires you to chase is not love that can hold you. And when you truly understand stage two, you stop being hypnotized by the reach. You stop confusing a test for a return. You stop trading your healing for temporary warmth. You stop reopening the door just because someone knocks softly. You let their nervous system feel what it avoided, consequence. And you let your own nervous system feel something it has been craving, safety. Not the safety of being chosen by them, but the safety of choosing yourself, steadily, quietly, without drama, without revenge, just the calm strength of a person who finally believes that love should not require them to disappear to be valued. There is a moment that feels almost unreal. The moment the avoidant realizes you're not coming back, and you can sense it even if they never say a word. It's not the moment you cry. It's not the moment you beg. It's not the moment you try to explain your pain with perfect sentences. It's the moment your energy goes quiet in a different way, the kind of quiet that doesn't reach for them anymore. The kind of quiet that isn't a tactic, it's acceptance. And acceptance is what shakes them, because acceptance means the cycle can't restart. For so long, the relationship was held together by one invisible thread: your willingness to keep trying, your willingness to chase clarity, to chase reassurance, to chase connection, to chase the version of them you saw in rare moments. Even when they withdrew, even when they went cold, even when they disappeared for a while, the thread stayed because you stayed. You kept the door open with your hope. You kept the bridge standing with your patience. You kept the story alive with your love. And then you stop. Not in a hateful way, not in a dramatic way. You stop in the most powerful way possible. You stop because you finally choose yourself. You stop because you realize you've been living in emotional suspense and you don't want that life anymore. You stop because your heart deserves to rest. You stop because you are tired of proving your worth to someone who keeps treating your love like it's always available. And when you stop, something begins to collapse inside them because the old dynamic has been their shelter. The old dynamic allowed them to receive love without fully risking love. It allowed them to stay in control of closeness. It allowed them to disappear and return without paying the full price of consequence. It allowed them to keep you as a comfort, even if they weren't building a future. So stage three of the internal collapse hits like a deep personal shock, the shock of ego and identity. Because it's not just that they might lose you, it's that they might lose the role they played in your mind. They might lose being the person you waited for. They might lose being the center of your emotional world. They might lose the power of knowing they could come back anytime and still find you soft. And ego does not handle that gently. Ego tries to protect itself by pretending nothing matters. Ego tries to stay cool. Ego tries to act like it's above it. Ego says, if she's gone, fine. Ego says, if he's moving on, whatever. But beneath that mask, something is burning, because if you are truly moving on, it means they were not as important as they thought. It means their distance was not as powerful as they believed. It means their silence did not keep you trapped. It means you found life again without them. And that hits the part of them that secretly relied on you being available as proof of their own value. So their thoughts begin to change. They start replaying moments they used to dismiss. They start remembering the way you looked when you were trying not to cry. They start hearing your voice when you said you needed consistency. They start recalling how patient you were, how gentle you were, how many chances you gave, how many times you softened your needs to protect their comfort. They start realizing you weren't asking for perfection, you were asking for presence, and they kept giving you absence. And here's what makes this stage feel like collapse. They start to feel something they avoided for so long: regret. Not always clean regret. Sometimes it's mixed with anger. Sometimes it's mixed with blame. Sometimes it's mixed with denial. But the regret is there because the ego sting becomes personal. They misjudged you. They assumed your love had no limit. They assumed you'd wait forever. They assumed you'd always come back. And now they are watching their assumptions fall apart. This is the stage where they might start checking, not always reaching checking. They look at your activity. They reread old messages. They scroll memories. They wonder if you're talking to someone else. They wonder if you're happier. They wonder if you finally stopped caring. And the thought that you might have stopped caring is the most terrifying thought of all, because if you stopped caring, the dynamic is dead. And here is where the collapse becomes dangerous, because stage 3 can lead to two different paths. One path is desperation that turns into control. They try to pull you back not with responsibility, but with disruption. They might send something that triggers your emotions. They might try to provoke a response. They might become suddenly charming, suddenly sweet, suddenly nostalgic, suddenly vulnerable. They might do anything to make you feel again, because if you feel, you're still connected. If you feel, you might chase. If you feel, the door might reopen. But the other path is something rarer, and it's where real change can begin. The ego breaks enough for honesty to enter, because sometimes, in stage 3, the avoidant realizes they can't hide behind coolness anymore. They realize the strategy failed. They realize distance did not protect them, it cost them. And if they are brave, truly brave, they let themselves feel the full weight of what they did, not just losing you, but how they made you feel while you were still there, how they left you alone in uncertainty, how they made your love feel like it was asking too much, how they turned your needs into pressure and your heart into a burden. This is where a real internal collapse becomes an emotional awakening, because the mirror finally shows them the truth. They didn't just lose a person, they lost someone who loved them through fear. And I want you to hear this carefully, because this is where your heart can get tricked again. Stage 3 can produce intensity. It can produce dramatic messages. It can produce late night confessions. It can produce, "I never meant to hurt you." It can produce tears. It can produce promises. But none of that is the proof. The proof is what happens after the emotion. Do they take responsibility without you dragging it out of them? Do they acknowledge the pattern clearly? Do they repair, not once, but repeatedly? Do they show up with consistency over time, even when they feel safe again? Do they respect your boundaries, or do they try to negotiate them away? Do they build something real, or do they simply want to stop the discomfort of losing access to you? Because the sad truth is, stage 3 can be the stage where they miss the comfort you provided more than they miss the reality of you. They can miss being loved without being ready to love well. They can miss the stability you offered without being ready to offer stability back. They can miss your presence without being ready to protect your heart, and that is why your power must remain quiet and steady. Your power is not in watching them collapse. Your power is in not collapsing back into the old version of you, the version who rushes to save the connection, the version who confuses their regret with growth, the version who accepts intensity as commitment. Your power is in holding your dignity while their ego is cracking. Because when you truly give up, it isn't hopeless, it's holy. It's the moment you stop giving your love to someone who keeps treating it like a guarantee. It's the moment you stop offering your heart as a place someone visits only when they're afraid. It's the moment you choose a love that does not require you to disappear to be valued. And if stage 3 becomes their awakening, they will come back with responsibility. If it becomes their manipulation, they will come back with tests. Either way, you will know the truth, because you are no longer measuring love by intensity. You are measuring love by patterns. And the pattern you choose from this moment forward is the one where you do not abandon yourself to keep someone else from feeling the consequence of losing you.